I'd like to thank you all for coming to today's event, Safe Spaces, Free Speech, and Academic Diversity in Law Schools. Well, of course, nobody's here to listen to me, so I'm going to try to do my part quickly, and then we can move on to our speakers. Josh Blackman is professor of law at South Texas College of Law, Houston, who specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. Josh is the author of the critically acclaimed Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. Josh was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. He's testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration, and he's an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Josh is the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league.
They should all play.
I just heard about this recently. I'm definitely making an account.
First Monday was last week. I get started.
He also blogs at joshblackman.com. Josh leads the cutting edge of legal analytics as director of judicial research at LexPredict. And he's the author of over 24 law review articles, and his commentary has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, USA Today, LA Times, and other national publications. Josh clerked for the Honorable Danny J. Boggs on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and for the Honorable Kim R. Gibson on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. He also graduated from George Mason University School of Law. Also providing commentary, we have Professor Koppelman, the John Paul Stevens Professor of Law and Professor of Political Science at Northwestern University. He will be providing commentary on Professor Blackman's speech. Professor Koppelman received Northwestern's 2015 Walder Award for Research Excellence. His scholarship focuses on issues at the intersection of law and political philosophy. His latest books are The Tough Luck Constitution and The Assault on Healthcare Reform, and the Defending American Religious Neutrality. He also published more than 100 articles in books and scholarly journals. He is an occasional contributor to Salon.com and the Balkanization blog. Everyone please welcome Professors Blackman and Koppelman.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to be here in Northwestern. I think you all hear me okay. Oh no, my mic's not on. Now it's on. It's great to be here at Northwestern, see some of my friends, Andy, Professor McGinnis, and Steve Luvet. The topic today focuses on free speech on campus. And usually when I talk about a topic, I can address it objectively and dispassionately. This is not one of those issues. Last spring, I was invited to speak at the CUNY Law School in Queens, New York, on a topic I've spoken on many times before, which is free speech. Now, you probably never heard of me. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, I don't know. But I'm not that important. And I don't think I'm worth protesting. I may say that quite candidly. Yet a couple days before I arrived on campus, students started circulating flyers and objecting to my presence on campus. They called on the Federalist Society chapter at CUNY to uninvite me. They wanted them to not let me in the building. They handed out these pamphlets with all these wild accusations about things I've said and written that weren't accurate. This all came as a surprise to me, but I didn't really put much weight in it because I was like, all right, whatever. You know, I'll show up, people will get their food, I'll give my talk, I'll leave, as I always do. But this event was a little bit different, and I want to just play a few clips from this. So the setup is, I get there to CUNY Law School, and the school tells me that a protest is forming against you. A protest for me? But then the school security person came up to me and said, you know, Josh, are you ready for this? I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'm fine. He said there are about 4 dozen people standing in the hallway outside your classroom. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of people. And then he said to me, what is your exit strategy? My exit strategy was Iraq? I mean, what, my exit strategy? He asked me, how are you planning to leave the building? I hadn't considered it. I said, well, I'll probably take an Uber. He's like, okay, good, you're not going on the subway. Oh. So at that moment, this issue became quite real for me, because there's no longer people simply protesting my ideas, but the school had a founded concern, apparently, for my safety, for my personal safety, that they want to know how I was leaving the building. So I'm going to play some of these clips, and I'll probably turn the audio on and off. I want to play a clip for you, just to see what happens. This is me walking down the hallway towards the classroom. By the way, that sign that says your legal analysis is lazy and wrong, I actually agree with that. So that was the only sign that I think is accurate. But there's the signs. We'll get to it. Okay. And the room's empty, right? So here's the setup. The protesters had signs, and they were hard to read. I was moving quickly, but saying that I am a white supremacist, that I am a fascist, I'm a Nazi, that I hate everyone, I'm a ableist, sexist, misogynist. I mean, they had lists, just every ist you can imagine. And they based this opposition in large part to some of my views on legal issues. For example, DACA, right? I think DACA is a good policy, but I think it's unlawful. It's true. I think the travel ban was a terrible policy, but the president had the power to engage in it. But they extrapolated from these views that I am nothing more than a racist. Now, I actually don't have a problem with these signs. If you want to protest in the hallway outside an event, go at it. Wave your signs, scream, do whatever you need to do, make your point heard. But what happens next was a little bit different. I'm going to play the video a little bit and I'll talk over it. So I walk into the room, and the room's empty. There's no one there. I'm thinking, okay, they're going to protest, they get their energy out, and so we buy here by myself. So I'm just going to let this roll for a bit. I walk in, no one there. I'm like, all right, whatever, I'll give my talk. But what happens next was also surprising. The protesters entered the room, and they didn't just enter the room, they circled it. The entire perimeter of the room was basically flanked by the students. I think they were mostly law students, or maybe non-law students. I think they were mostly law students. And this is where I think the event took a turn for the worse, in that they weren't just standing in the back of the room, they were standing behind me. Why is this important? Again, one of these issues that comes up is physical safety. If people are standing 6 inches behind you, they can do something bad to you. We have events, for example, Charles Murray and other prominent conservative speakers have spoken at Middlebury College and otherwise, and these events have quickly turned into violence. Now, I'm going to put the audio on for a minute. What's happening is the president of the chapter, no different than our friends here, are telling them, don't stand behind them. Okay? And they're saying, don't stand behind them. If you notice, I actually haven't said a word. I'm up there silent. And one of the reasons why I like playing this video is it gives you tips of how to deal with this sort of commotion. What these protesters really wanted was for me to go up there and own them, right? To dunk on them, right? To pardon Ben Shapiro's phrases, to curse at them, to yell at them, to call them snowflakes. And I didn't do any of that. In fact, my strategy was one of let them get their energy out. I play a little trick on them in that I deliberately started the event 20 minutes late to get them really, let them get their energy out like a bunch of toddlers, right? Let them get their energy out, let them scream, and by the time they came in, they were already pretty tired. Okay? So now we're going on for a couple minutes. I haven't said a word yet. Okay? Okay. And their objection was that I was even allowed in the building. They were sincerely opposed to this. I promise, I'll tie this together after the video is over, but just follow along. This will make sense in a bit.
There are students that are directly affected by legal opportunity is a myth. You still have an opportunity to leave.
And so one of the students just said, you still have an opportunity to leave. I want to dwell on that for a moment. If you notice, the room was empty. Okay? By the end of the event, the room was full. About 50 people there. That's the same size as this crowd. Why are people not there? A number of the students told me that they were actually afraid to be seen with me. They were actually afraid to be shamed that they went to a Federalist event where I would be present. And he said even indeed in class, that they were afraid of voicing certain views, not because of the faculty. Faculty's fine. Because of whatever peer pressure their colleagues may bring to bear on them. Okay?
So thank you guys for coming. I'm here to introduce Professor Josh Blackman from the South Texas College of Law. He's here today to discuss the topic of freedom of speech in the context of university.
Okay. So let me just comment on a little bit here. We have a notion in free speech doctrine called the heckler's veto. I'm sure you cited this in your First Amendment class. And the notion is this. When the heckler, that is the people trying to shout you down, are able to exert so much force or pressure or noise to force the speaker from not speaking, you actually have the heckler silencing speech. Now, I want to actually ask you a question to think about this, right? Was I silenced here, right? And in thinking about the question, ask yourself this. If you've been invited to a college somewhere to give a talk on whatever topic, and you show up and they tell you there are 40 protesters in the hallway, would you walk down that hallway? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know. Right? If you show up and the room is flanked by 30 people surrounding you who are yelling at you, shouting at you, calling you a white supremacist, would you go forward with the event or would you say, screw this, I'm not going to waste my time? Right? If you start speaking and they interrupt you every 5 seconds, would you walk away or would you keep going? Right? How do we measure the heckler's veto in the abstract? It in large part depends, and I don't like to say this, but on the fortitude of the speaker. Because if the speaker is willing to push through this, eventually you get to say your piece. But if the speaker says, I am not doing this, clear the room out or else I'm not speaking, then the speaker was silent. So it's an odd aspect of the heckler's veto, which I didn't quite appreciate until I was actually up there. And I still don't know the answer. I'm asking this question because I do appreciate all of your thoughts.
Numerous articles on numerous constitutional topics, and he's given a speech many times before, and so Professor Blackman, everyone. Well, thank you very much for having me.
White men and those who support white supremacy.
Okay, so here's what's going on, right? I said 3 or 4 words. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having, 5 words, whatever, right? And they initially start shouting me down. Again, my strategy, which I would commend to all of you if you're ever in this position, is to just take a step back and let them voice their opinions. I think it's a far more productive approach than calling in the cops, calling in security, saying, clear these out, let me start speaking, right? The reason why is, again, protesters can only protest for so long. Right? We're all human. We have a finite supply of energy. It's a battery, right? You run out eventually. Okay? So what happens here is actually fascinating. I don't want to focus on this. If you notice someone said something about white supremacy, you couldn't really tell who it was, but there was an African-American student in the back who actually came to see me. And he actually wanted to ask me some questions. And the students at the front were shaming, saying, why are you here with him, with me? Why are you supporting this white supremacist, Josh, right? And so listen to this for a minute.
I'm not white.
Then why send
Excuse me, I think it was already explained to you that you're not supposed to disrupt the speaker once he starts.
Okay. So now, the next incident that comes up is this is an associate dean. Okay? She walks in and she gives something of a warning. And one of the important aspects of any free speech on campus debate is the role of the administration. A very important aspect is the administration cannot pick sides. And this is something I believe firmly. If a student group with the resources invites a speaker to campus, the administration has an obligation to ensure that speaker can be heard. Right? We can get into this in the Q&A about what kind of speakers perhaps are appropriate and which ones aren't. But in terms of the people the Federal Society brings in, I think those people on the list should be heard. So now, just listen to what this Associate Dean brings in.
Everybody stop. Let me tell you something. The university rules are people get to speak. You may protest. You may protest, but you may not keep anyone from
question, right? Were they preventing me from speaking? I'm not asking this as merely as a hypothetical. I don't have an answer for myself, right? I mean, no one was putting duct tape on my mouth, right? They didn't block my entrance to the room, but they were shouting over me. Does that prevent you from speaking? It makes it a hell of a lot harder. And perhaps I said, screw this, I'm leaving. I'm not putting up with this, right? Imagine if you had any of your class in torts or contracts, right? And professor's trying to lecture, people are shouting over him. How do you think that would go down? You'd be thrown out of class in 2 seconds. But if you're a guest speaker, the rule is different. Okay, so listen to the dean for a minute.
If you do, I have other things to do. I will be back. Or you can resolve this yourself. Or you can have me resolve it.
Now notice what she didn't say. She said, I'll be back, right? The Schwarzenegger style, right? She never said, you will be suspended. You will be subject to disciplinary action. And indeed, I can tell you, there was no disciplinary action handed out for this behavior. And this, I think, is another tough question, right? Should these students have been subject to a disciplinary action? Again, I'm on the fence about this. Even though I was there and they were interfering with my event, I go back and forth in this one, right? Because I think they were expressing their grievances. They had their valid points. But at what point does a student do something that warrants suspension, maybe counseling, or writing a paper, or taking a class? You know, there are different things universities can do, right? Where do you draw that line when behavior becomes so egregious? Now, they didn't touch me. And let me make this point very clear. There was no physical battery. They didn't touch me. I didn't feel threatened. Maybe I should. I was a little bit naive. But I didn't think they were going to hurt me. But merely shouting over someone, is that worthy of disciplinary actions? Okay.
Why are you still bringing racism to your school? How can you answer that?
Why haven't you provided support for students who are affected by students?
You here.
You're not children, you can't talk just like that.
Please don't.
Okay. So someone said, you're not children, you can't talk just like that. Okay. What happens next surprised me. There was one professor in the back who shouts out, he says, don't take the bait. And I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but I figured out later. The students thought that I came to CUNY to bait them, to troll them, right? That I came there to get a reaction out of them. And for some, I think, very controversial speakers, like a Milo perhaps, maybe an Ann Coulter, that's their goal, right? They like having these protests to get these reactions where all these guys are, you know, going crazy and protesting, right? That wasn't my intent. I don't do that. But a student's telling them not to take the bait and give in to what I'm trying to do. But I wasn't doing anything. So just listen for a minute.
Take the bait.
She is threatening you. Well, it's really her choice whether she wants to do something. It's not hard.
It's really within her discussion.
She's literally not.
So,
Now, we're 5 minutes and I haven't said a word. I said, you know, welcome. So I finally say, okay, I sensed the room was quieting down a bit. Hi, how you doing? And I sense, okay, now maybe I can interject. In hindsight, I can tell you things actually got better from here. I didn't know this at the time, right? As far as I knew, this was going to go on for an hour and I wouldn't get a damn word out. So I made a decision, right? I threw my talk out the window. I wanted to give a talk in the first semester. I was like, this is not the place for that. So I threw that out the window. And instead I said, let me try to engage them. Let me engage them. And they'd handed out this pamphlet with all these bullet points about me, things I've written, which were grossly off context, but they did their homework, right? They did their opposition research. And they had these flyers out throughout the school. They put one in every locker, right? These flyers were littered everywhere, attacking me, calling me a white supremacist, calling me a racist. I have them. I actually brought them home. They're hilarious. But I'd say, okay, let me actually engage them, see how they handle this.
For those of you who are actually here to hear me speak, I'll try. When I came, there's a sign and around suppressors not welcome. And it says at the bottom, we reject.
See that? Yeah, hear that? Oppressors are not welcome like you. That was my nickname by the end of it. Oppressor.
That his views, my views, merit status, and reject the myth of legal objectivity. Josh Blackman is not. But I'm still.
It's helpful, right? Always be able to laugh at yourself. in any profession, it makes situations diffuse very quickly, just as a general rule. Okay?
So, I actually want to start by using the one legal argument you actually made. You said violence exists in the law, and it's a myth that law is inherently neutral. Okay? You said there's a myth of legal objectivity. So let me talk about legal objectivity for a few minutes, right? Someone did some excellent opposition research. When did this actually applaud you? You found that 7 or 8 bullets on various videos that given over the years. But I want to make a few points. For example, you wrote that I supported the president's decision to rescind DACA. Now let me tell you something. I actually support the DREAM Act.
So my goal here is trying to bridge some common ground, right? Again, the owning the live strategy, Shapiro style, not my. Try to bridge common ground with people that you will not agree with. I promise you, there's at least something, right? Some small line where you can find a common ground with anyone in the world. You have to think and find it. And if you do that, you put them at arms. Like, wait a minute, this guy's agreeing with us. This can't be right. So just watch what happens next.
This might surprise you. I actually think the DREAM Act is a good piece of legislation.
So gaslighting, you guys know what that is? Does everyone know what gaslighting is? It comes from this story about gaslighting where if you have this, a natural gas leak and you start hallucinating with all the gases you're inhaling, right? The idea is that I'm trying to warp their reality by lying to them and making them think I'm this normal person when really this is, this white supremacist oppressor. So I sense, okay, they're getting uncomfortable with me, right? I'm giving them ideas, like they're not handling it well. Okay, so see what happens.
Let me speak, please. And were a member of Congress, I would vote for the DREAM Act. My position is that the policy itself is not consistent with the rule of law, which teaches a lesson, right? The lesson is this.
At this point, they've stopped yelling. Now they're just snapping. And I was like, okay, they're done, right? Whatever they had, whatever energy was compelling, they've lost. I was like, okay, I'm good now. Like at that point, I recognized that they crescendo. They were on the downhill.
Support something as a matter of policy, but then find that the law doesn't permit it. And then the answer is to change the law.
Oh, there it is. Everyone heard it? Fuck the law. At that point, I was like, okay, they're done, right? When law students are confronted with an argument and all they can say in response is, fuck the law. I'm like, okay, they're getting their money's worth in tuition, right? Iraq, there's the F words in the middle, right? That's the A. But I used it, and just keep watching, right?
Fuck the law, right? That's a very good thing. You're in law school, right? And it's bizarre if you say fuck the law when you're in law school.
Yeah, I heard what she just said. I didn't actually hear at the time. I didn't register, but she said you chose CUNY to get this reaction. At that point, they were blaming me for their protest. They were actually blaming me for what had happened, which I had to chuckle. Okay, fine.
Well, if you let me speak, So fuck the law, right? That's a good mantra, fuck the law. You do, and I'm actually very impressed. Let me say this, I'm actually impressed that there's so many of you. You can be anywhere right now, and you chose to come out here and exercise your constitutional rights. You want to exercise your rights, I'll do the same. And I'm here the same, so I'm going to express my views. So let me go down this list you have here, this little checklist, right? I think DACA.
Hear that? I don't want to listen to this. Now it gets better. They leave.
Please leave. I don't mean I think DACA is a good policy.
I think you're tired.
No, I'm feeling pretty good.
You're lying to yourself.
I think you're a white supremacist.
This is really about CUNY law and how you let this happen. And shame on all of you for being here. How could you let that happen?
I don't support this.
All right. So I'm going to stop the audio. You can keep just watching the video in the background. But at this point, they left. I didn't know if they left for good. I had this sinking feeling that they'd come back and try and disrupt in the middle, but they didn't. And what actually happened was a fairly, I thought, effective discussion. Again, I chucked my speech out the window. I stopped giving the speech altogether, and I said, I'll tell you what, questions. And I took questions for about a good hour. I didn't give a speech. I said just questions, whatever you want. And slowly but surely, the room filled up. See, there's like basically no one here. If you go towards the end of the video, the room's full. And again, a lot of people came in and they said that they were afraid or ashamed to be seen with me. So I'm going there and I'm giving lectures on, taking questions on originalism, textualism, federalism, separation of powers, right? 14th Amendment, whatever they wanted to ask me about, I gave my honest opinion. And I truly felt like an ambassador to a foreign land, right? Because usually when I go to a law school, the students have some familiarity with what I'm talking about, originalism, textualism. But these were just foreign concepts then that they'd only heard on like secondhand by watching an MSNBC clip of Fox News. Like they hadn't ever actually seen in real life a right-of-center thinker who was not insane, right? They'd never been exposed to this. Their only understanding of conservative thought was the caricature they see on TV, on cable news. And I actually got through those kids. One guy held up a sign the entire event saying that you are an oppressor. And I gave him my card at the end of the event, and he actually emailed me and said, it was actually very funny the way he phrased it, he said, I no longer have enough evidence to conclude that you are an oppressor. Ah, okay, I'll take it, right? Lawyer, yeah. I didn't meet the burden of proof to be an oppressor, okay, fine. And several people actually said, okay, you made your points. Now, this is all well and good, but I want to come back to the speech identifier. Did they stop me from speaking, right? Did they actually infringe on my speech rights? Now, they're students at a public school, but the question is, did they actually exercise a heckler's veto? I go back and forth. I don't know, because I pushed through. They disrupted for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then I was able to talk unmolested for a good hour. But had I said, screw this, I am not dealing with this interruption, and left, then they would have shut me down. I think the much tougher question is, did the university fail in their responsibility? I think this is an easier question. The university should not have let them stand behind me. That one I think is an easy rule. Physical safety of speakers is such an easy thing. And again, I didn't feel threatened, but if there's people standing 6 inches behind you, it can get ugly very quickly. So I think a general rule is providing some form of physical safety. Look, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg was speaking at CUNY and people were standing 6 inches behind them, they'd be in jail right now, okay? I don't say that with any doubt in my mind. So at least at a minimum, physical safety is important. Now, a tougher question, should the university have removed people from the room who were interrupting me? How I think I would handle this, and I welcome Andy's thoughts on this as well, is you give them a warning. Give them a warning saying, if you keep doing this, we will remove you from the room. And if you give them the warning and they keep interrupting and shouting down, at that point, you can remove them from the room. Should you discipline them, suspend them, etc.? Again, I think if you give them a valid warning, the school has a policy. The policy is in writing. It's not them making up an ad hoc rule. It says you have to let speakers speak, right? It's in writing, black and white. And if they ignore the warning at that point, I think you can have some form of discipline, okay? Now, the harder question, right? Again, I'm fairly mundane. I'm not that important. I don't need to have a massive security protest and detail everything else. But what happens when schools want to invite a different kind of speaker? I'll say the name Milo Yiannopoulos. Do you know who that is? He's a provocateur, right? His job is to basically make people angry and do bad stuff, right? Ann Coulter's probably in that realm, but not quite as much. I don't think Ben Shapiro's in that realm, but he sort of gets that reaction anyway. But there's certain speakers who their entire purpose is to make people angry. They're not there to spread ideas or to exchange information. They're there to basically piss people off, right? How should universities deal with this? So one way this often occurs is involving security fees. When Milo went to Berkeley last year, there were all these massive riots, right? Which resulted in property damage, physical damage, people were injured. So you do need some sort of security detail. Can you then require the club, the student organization, to foot the bill, right? $30,000 to hire an entire flank of SWAT team, right? No club can afford this. Like FedSoc pays for some Chipotle and some tomatoes for Andy to throw at me, perhaps, right? But they don't have the funding for these sorts of things. One policy that Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean at Berkeley Law, came up with, which I think is good, is basically saying it sucks, but you have to pay for it for at least maybe one event a year, right? I think it might be a good balance where you give each club one freebie where they can go invite the speaker of their choice. If they want to go through with it, the school should pay for it. And again, that comes out of student activity fees, if the state institution, taxpayer dollars perhaps, but I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. But for most speakers who aren't controversial, I think the university has an absolute obligation to let them speak. No one has to go. I think they can protest outside. They're not required to listen to me, which I think is they didn't even listen to a word I was saying, which didn't matter, but they're required there. One last point, and I think this something builds on John McGinnis's research, is in terms of faculty support. Not a single member of the faculty at CUNY said a word to me. Not one. The dean of the law school never contacted me. In fact, I saw her at a conference. She pretended not to know me. It was actually really funny. She's like, I was like, hey, I'm Josh. She's like, oh, hi. And she kind of walked away. Fine. Not a single member of the faculty reached out to say, Josh, this happened to you or anything. And I think that's unfortunate. CUNY prides itself on as a public interest law school. The faculty are all far to the left, as far as I can discern. And none of them, not even their common law professors, sensed even the slightest bit that this was problematic. Even just emailing me privately saying, hey, Josh, I'm sorry this happened to you. You know, next time you're in town, let's go chat. And I know people there. I know people in the faculty. The school didn't have a Federalist chapter for the longest time, and they actually basically reanimated it a year or two ago, basically when I was there, right? And members there are actually shamed for being part of them. It's very helpful when you have faculty members willing to stand up and support this. At Northwestern, you don't have this problem. I think you have a very good balance here at Northwestern, a very good balance for a top-tier law school. But at some schools like CUNY, they don't have this. So you basically have the students by themselves with no one to turn to. Basically, I was trying to run interference with and help these guys out. But it's an important aspect of having any sort of free speech culture on campus to also have intellectual diversity among the professors. That helps the students, provides reinforcement, and if something goes wrong like this, I'm not there by myself. The professor saying, you guys stop this. The only professor there was on the other side. Okay. That's all I want to say for now. Maybe I'll do some Q&A after Professor Koppelman speaks, but I appreciate your attention, and I'll turn it over to Andy. Thank you, Andy.
Hi. So it's quite a lot going on here. I take it that people are generally familiar with the arguments for free speech, that you're more aware, better understand your own view if you are acquainted with and able to engage the views on the other side. That's important. Even, let's suppose that CUNY, I know nothing about CUNY law. But even if one stipulates that everybody at CUNY, the whole faculty, believes that what we are doing here is we are training social justice warriors to try to respond to the racism and inequality of American society, and that is our mission, and it's straightforwardly political. Still, because it's a law school, you've got to be able to turn the chessboard around and engage the other side. So students who have no comprehension of conservative arguments are just not going to be very good social justice warriors. So for that reason, the idea of free speech really ought to be common ground. And I will say, to a large extent, it is common ground. The particular crowd of yahoos who were protesting this aren't representative of the American left. Most of the American left thinks that this stuff is stupid. So on the question of, how should the university respond? The university ought to respond in such a way that the activity of engaging with ideas is able to continue. And it's threatened from the left by the tendency to shout people down in this way, and that's more of a tendency on the left than it is on the right. There are also the trouble with provocateurs like Yiannopoulos and proposals which have actually been floated from the political right to require universities to provide free funding to any speaker who any student group wants to invite, is that it attacks the university from a different direction. The University of California at Berkeley actually spends its money on good things. on education, on scholarships, and whatever it was going to spend the money on is now being spent on security instead. And so therefore providing a worse educational experience for the marginal student dependent on financial aid, no educational experience, because provocateurs like Yiannopoulos are there really just for the purpose of provoking this sort of thing. Josh regarded this crowd protesting him as troubling and an obstruction to what he was trying to accomplish. Had Yiannopoulos encountered the same group, he would have encountered it with joy. It was just what he was hoping to do. So the administration, I think, can reasonably try to figure out some way to filter out people who really have nothing to contribute to the university like Yiannopoulos without a filter that keeps out people like Josh who actually have something to say. The question of how one does that, really, the question of whether the university fails really depends on whether the ideas get communicated or not. In terms of, bottom line, did the university succeed in enabling you to engage with students? I'm not confident. This administrator knows her school better than I do, but in the end, the protesters did go away. So in that sense, I think that the university didn't fail. There's a complex interaction here between free speech principles, which one can state in the abstract. If any of you have not read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, you should. And then the question of what do you do in a particular context to facilitate the operation of the university. And it's tricky. I understand that it might have been bad for CUNY long term if a bunch of police had come in and started dragging the protesters out and there had been violence. That would not have been good for CUNY, it wouldn't have been good for you. So the delicate situation that the administrator's in, I'm not sure whether second guess it or not. And this is part of the tricky thing about free speech. Bottom line is to create an environment in which people feel like they are able to say unpopular things and think unpopular thoughts and think thoughts that they are inclined to reproach themselves for even entertaining, and then ask themselves, yeah, but is that right? And follow the argument where it goes. And here, I'll just end on this note, this is why we the faculty are so good for you. Because we are in the job, in the business of training you to turn the chessboard around. So I don't know how many of you are first years or how many of you have read the cases where the Supreme Court upholds the rights of slaveholders in Dred Scott. You got to be able to make the case on behalf of fundamental human rights violations and crimes against humanity, because you're going to have to argue against that stuff. And you got to know what the best arguments are. So with respect to that aim of that kind of flexibility of mind, there's no political gulf between us at all.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll make one brief point rebuttal and then we'll turn to questions. How much of a disruption must there be before the heckler's veto is triggered? And I don't use triggered in that other sense, but at what point do you actually exercise the heckler's veto? Is it enough to simply protest outside the room, to shout people down during the introduction, shout them down throughout the first 5 minutes, or if they leave? One other point, and I'll stop here. They left, but I didn't know if they were going to come back. And that's actually a concern which, in hindsight, it's still, we know they didn't come back. But I actually thought they would come back at some point, right? I didn't know. I heard people murmuring in the hallway so that maybe they might try to return. And that does impact you just psychologically for your ability to present when you have this sort of anticipation. But again, I actually don't take a firm position on what should happen. Because I was there, I don't think I can be objective on this. It's actually a weird space where I have my own strong feelings, but I try to set them aside. So I'm going to not make any judgments. But I welcome any questions or feedback from anyone in the room. Yes, sir.
Professor Kaufman described maybe a filter or something that could weed out the Milos of the world, and you coming here to speak, just to present ideas. What could such a thing look like? I guess it's a question for both of you, because it's hard to put that sort of power in one person's hands. They might have their own leanings. And
Andy, do you want to start?
it's hard to have an objective measure.
You know, I haven't thought through how you do it institutionally. The simplest way is to give it to the discretion of an administrator to veto, but then everything depends on how that administrator does it. I can't think of any mechanical litmus test for distinguishing.
Yeah, my concern is having that veto existing at all. If a student organization is willing to invite someone like a Milo, and they're willing to take the social and political hit on campus for doing this, I think they should be allowed to do it. The alternative, where a administrator or a panel of students or a board of visitors or whoever you want to do it, having the ability to veto, I think would disproportionately fall on one side. Perhaps in a very conservative state, they would veto liberal speakers, and perhaps in a fairly liberal state, they would veto conservative speakers. And it's going to hit both sides, right? If you want to have Hillsdale College, right? I don't know, invite the president of NARAL to go speak there might be some uprising about that. They'd probably be allowed to do it, I think. But to give an administrator of any college a veto, I think is problematic, which is why I think the Chemerinsky proposal is saying, okay, we're going to spend a lot of money on this, so we should spend it on scholarships, but it's worth it to defend free speech. I'm okay with that. Again, it's not a good use of money to have a SWAT team out where people are burning stuff. But again, I mean, they're choosing to engage in acts of violence, right? No one forced them to do it. Okay, questions? John?
So I'm maybe a little skeptical of Andy's proposition that they handle this well because of I think the deterrent effect on speakers. So I'd like to go, personally, I was just invited a few weeks ago to go to Middlebury.
Oh, wow.
And so, I talked to my wife, who was sort of against it, but I decided to do it. But it certainly had some deterrent effect. I mean, it was less likely that I would go there, and I think there would be some people who would not go to Middlebury. And there's no doubt I would be less likely to go to CUNY after this. And so, I think that's a problem with that kind of reaction, because I think there's no doubt this makes it hard for you to get your remarks. You had to talk about something else. I prefer to talk about what I'm going to talk about. I don't think that's a ridiculous perspective of a teacher, and I think and so I don't think this is a good way to handle it. I don't think you necessarily have to call the police, but I think you need to have clear rules of the ones you suggested, not to be able to continually interrupt a speaker, not to be behind the speaker, so people I think who were less courageous than you, I think would have been very worried about that, and others would then be deterred. So I do think we have to think of the long-term effects, not just about this particular incident, and that's why I tend to have a somewhat sterner view about what the administration should do. Yeah, the deterrence point cuts both ways. So Professor McGinnis was talking about deterrence for future speakers, right? Would he go to CUNY? Would he want to deal with this sort of garbage, right? Someone say, screw it, I'm not going to go waste my time. I'll go speak where I'm wanted. The deterrence point cuts also with the students, right? There was no repercussions for engaging this action against me. So next time they'll be emboldened to engage in perhaps even more dramatic protests against someone else who may or may not warrant it. And by doing this and not engaging in a discipline, the university set a precedent that you can shout down a speaker for 7 or 8 minutes, stand right behind him, and we won't do anything about it. And students remember that, because they say, well, you didn't protest, you didn't discipline the people to Blackman protest, why are you disciplining now? So every time the administration does or does not take an action, it sets an internal precedent that they have to then abide by. And I think this sends a signal for other students. Yeah, Andy.
So I think that I understand the university's reluctance to have police use force. Something that I think that I would have considered as an administrator if one anticipates that this is going to happen, and one anticipates that the students are not going to be violent. It's very differently if one anticipates violence. But if what one anticipates is this kind of disruption, you can have a couple of people in there and simply photograph those and make videos of those who have disrupted the speaker, and then institute disciplinary proceedings against them afterward. It's clearly inappropriate behavior, and it clearly is violating the rules of the university. Disciplinary response is appropriate. If you can do that there are ways of doing that without risking a riot.
They're right on video. They know who they are, right?
Yeah. And the university's failure to respond when these videos, I presume, were available to the
yes, they were. They were.
I think that's a mistake. These students should do.
Yeah, so just FYI, there's software that does this. Some right-wing activists made it, where they actually filter protest footage through social media, and they make matches, and they can connect them to LinkedIn pages, and they can actually make hit lists of these Antifa protesters. This stuff exists. So if you're at one of these protests, they'll match it to your Facebook, your Instagram, link it to your LinkedIn profile, and then, in the back.
Yeah, so one thing that that was kind of touched on tangentially too, so far as the deterrence effect in speakers, is that at these events, especially UC Berkeley's really fraught with this, the type of events that do become violent,
Right.
is it often becomes the onus of the speaker. Like you said, it was the Blackman event. And so when there's a violent riot, and you're being here, it's being mentioned that like Ben Shapiro, for example, is a security threat. Well, he's not out there throwing trash cans through windows and ripping ATMs out of the wall.
Yeah, and this goes back to Professor McGinnis's point. It puts a certain onus on the speaker that you otherwise don't have. Now, I look pretty cool and composed up there, but I was scared shitless, right? Just be real here, right? I had never happened to me before. I was shaking. You maybe can't tell in the video. My mom saw it. My mom always knows, right? Moms know. If you actually look at my hand, it's shaking. Moms always know. My hand's shaking. I was scared out of my mind. You didn't know, because I keep my voice composed. I try and keep cool, but I couldn't do what I want to do. And when you're up there with all this stuff happening, you can't focus, right? I mean, try next time. Try giving a lecture on the subway when all this stuff's going around you. Just try it. You can't do it. If there was violence, though, right? If these guys tried to mob me, I was a goner. And I mean that sincerely. There were about a dozen people surrounding me. I'm only one person. I'm not fit. I'm not strong. I don't think I can handle myself with this sort of violence. And they had one security guy in the back who could have done absolutely nothing to save me. I do worry about this. My dad was like, you can never go back there. You have to stop doing this. No more Federalists. I'm like, no, Dad, relax. But he has a valid point. Right? John's wife, perhaps the same. When the speaker then has the obligation to not only give his or her speech that he wants to give, but also to deal with all these extraneous circumstances, it serves as a huge distraction. And it dilutes, and in some cases, it eliminates the message. Steve, was your hand up a minute ago? I'm sorry, I jumped over you. Yeah, in the back.
Professor Kaufman mentioned that CUNY should have maybe used the video to discipline the students. So, Professor, what discipline would what disciplinary measures would you recommend against students who maybe delayed an event by 10 minutes? What would you recommend that the university do?
Delaying an event has nothing to do with discipline.
But you said you wanted to discipline some of those students, right? What would you recommend that they do?
I have a range of forms of discipline. One can put a note in that transcript. One can, there's a range of ways of disciplining students. Don't violate the rules of Northwestern and find out what they are.
Yeah, and I think your question, sir, in the back is a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I've given this a lot of thought, and again, I don't think I can be objective. I think they have legitimate grievances, and I think they exercise their grievance in an appropriate fashion. Would disciplining them stop future students from doing this? Perhaps. Students maybe respond to incentives, or they wear as a badge of courage, and they show the future employer, I got disciplined for shutting down a right-wing fascist, right? I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know the right answer. But the point you said, they only shut down for 10 minutes. That's a valid argument, right? Did they actually shut it down, or did they merely delay it 10 minutes? And I think you have to look at the dynamics of, I was shaking up there, didn't give the speech I wanted to do. There was a disruption, however low the duration. Yes, sir, over there.
So yeah, obviously, I think it does sound like CUNY should have done more to secure them in the room, from the hallway, not the room, like that. Maybe campus security for that, I think. But what I'm kind of conflicted about, I don't really have an opinion about it yet, but it's just the idea of disciplining even though they were wrong, or trying to track them down for their LinkedIn or something like that, it is a little hard to square with principles of free speech. Because even though they were maybe a little inappropriate here, they should have been kicked out. They were shutting down speech. It does also feel that is a bit of a chilling effect to go after them, and that that in itself is a bit of an inappropriate speech.
Yeah. So if you couldn't hear, the question was, there's a chilling effect by disciplining the students, and I concur. This is why I'm honestly on the fence about this, right? They were protesting what they saw as an injustice. Now, we can say that they were nuts. I'm not an oppressor, not a white supremacist, whatever, but let's just assume I am for a moment, right? Assume for the argument's sake, right? Their reaction they thought was justified. For the university to then discipline them, that would perhaps chill them from having future protests. I think one way to move forward is for the university to have some sort of clear policy about what is and is not acceptable for protests. The school has a policy that says you can't stop people from speaking. I'm paraphrasing. That's what it more or less says. But that doesn't give any specific guidelines. So I'd be in favor of actually drafting guidelines about what is and not permissible, right? I like the rule, the one warning rule, because it gives flexibility, right? It says after the university gives you one warning about disruption, if you keep disrupting, then you're removed from the room and disciplined. I'd be supporting of that, because then it's in writing what the rule is, not just, well, the administrator said, if you keep protesting, I'll come back. Well, what the hell does that mean, right? They didn't really know. And as far as I know, she was in the hallway the entire time when they kept protesting. She didn't actually come back. So she didn't even follow through with her own threat, as it were. Yeah, Andy, yeah, and then?
Just on this, I guess on the question of where one draws the line, I think, yeah, you need really clear guidelines. Even when they came into the room, I've been at an event here at Northwestern that was actually another Federalist Society event. Ryan Anderson, who's an opponent of same-sex marriage, came to speak. There were protests. The protesters came into the room. They lined the back of the room. They held up their signs, and they didn't make any noise.
That's fine.
And I thought, that's fine. So having them in the room isn't the problem. The problem is shouting over the speaker. And so you want a clear rule. That's where the line is. You can't interrupt and disrupt the speaker. Once you've got the right line, then I am untroubled by deterring people from crossing that line. Crossing that line is not actually facilitating free speech. It is shutting down the views of speech you disagree with, and that's not okay.
Steve, do you want to add something?
Yeah. You have both articulated what I think you would recognize as the classic liberal view of freedom of speech. Could have had this discussion when I was in law school in the early 1970s, and the positions would have been identical. I agree with that. I grew up with it. I agree with it. I benefited from it. I would not have graduated from college, been thrown out, if that had not been the dominant view. But you have not confronted the counter-argument, which I think is sort of odd, given the importance of confronting counter-arguments, which people raise seriously, that equality is a higher value than freedom of speech, that certain speech infringes on the principle of equality, and therefore can legitimately be restrained. That's what people say.
Yeah.
They say it seriously, and although I disagree, you haven't addressed it.
Oh, I'd be happy. So 2 weeks ago, I was at Georgetown Law Center, and I debated Michael Seidman, who has a new paper basically saying that the free speech principles is not progressive, and we don't need free speech anymore. And if you listen to what the students were saying, they actually said that my speech is harmful, right? Not just that it's hate speech, we don't hate speech, but that my speech harms people because it oppresses people, that by my mere being there and opening my mouth, I am reducing the dignity of, for example, DACA recipients, the Dreamers, right? That I am reducing the dignity of perhaps Muslim students. I'm talking about the travel ban, whatever it happens to be. And this is and Steve's right, this is an argument that's gaining currency on campuses. And it's one that if you don't accept as a bedrock principle the classical liberal view that there's intrinsic value in free speech, then indeed my speech perhaps shouldn't be permitted. This is why I do think education is so important. I'm sure in their free speech class or their First Amendment class or con law, they were taught about this sort of equality principle. I don't know how well they were taught the John Stuart Mill version of equality, which brings back to faculty diversity, intellectual diversity. It's not that you need it, but at least have faculty willing to give alternate views. Again, I was giving them arguments that they just never heard before. I seriously felt like an ambassador. And some of them had heard it, but a lot of people just, they were unfamiliar with it. So as I go forward in this debate, Steve, thank you for making this point, I will address that point. And I debated Simon on this for an hour last week. And he says, you know what? On the whole, free speech might help minorities, might help disadvantaged people, but it's more likely to help wealthy corporate interests. He makes his point. I think he makes his point, as cogently as you can make that point. And if you accept that view, then I should be excluded. Put me on the veto list.
Some of this turns on how you construe free speech. I was just talking to another professor in another school who said that the Supreme Court in the area of commercial speech is moving in the direction of construing free speech so broadly that tort liability for failure to warn might be in question because it counts as compelled speech. It strikes me as loony, but I can't rule it out. It seems to me that if you were going to defend free speech, the claim that some speech is worthless and harmful, defenders of free speech just own up to that. Yeah, there is some speech that is worthless, it's destructive, it gives people a right to say things that nobody should ever say to anybody. Fred Phelps, protesting military funerals, was holding up signs that say, "Thank God for dead soldiers." Deeply disgusting. It would be a better planet without the likes of Phelps ever besmirching its surface. But the way that you engage with that is by actually encountering those ideas. And that idea that it's really free people encounter all sorts of bad ideas and bad things might happen. That idea goes back a long way. Who let the serpent into the Garden of Eden? Oh, him.
Ma'am, you've been patiently waiting.
Yes, first I want to say hello. I'm a faculty member here, and unlike the CUNY, I want to say thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I wanted to tell you that I think it's important that we're having this discussion. I'm having lots of feelings. I don't know if other people are as well. So I appreciate that. I think free speech is an important concept to explore. The work that I do tries to explore things like dialogue on campus and opportunities for people to connect in relationship in a different way. And I'd like to know what you think about those options, whether you think they're likely to make a difference, and what your experience has been with dialogue.
Oh, I love dialogue. I love talking to people. Thank you. If you want to go, the video's on YouTube. It's at 27,000 views, or almost 30,000 views. I had a long dialogue with some of these students where we went back and forth about 10 minutes. And they were throwing everything at me. They were asking about Reconstruction, the 3/5 clause, right? The Electoral College, right? I mean, they were really reaching for everything. And I responded to them as honestly and candidly as I could. I told them my views where I thought they would agree with me, and where I disagree, we would be perhaps just a little disagreeable. But we had a long discussion, and I truly felt at the end of our discussion, our dialogue, I actually made a little headway with these kids, that they didn't quite think I was who I was when I walked in. I think I did, and I told you this one guy sent me an email saying, I don't have enough evidence to say that you're still an oppressor. And a couple people emailed me, and they actually felt that it was cathartic.
Did they influence you? Did having dialogue with them?
Yeah, I learned stuff.
Okay, so there was that mutuality.
Oh,
I want to say we do circles here at Northwestern. Tyler, I know you came once to a circle. I think we struggle at the circles to have different perspectives present and feel welcome. And I just want to say we're doing one this Thursday. If people want to come and do dialogue and have dialogue together, we would welcome you. Details will be sent to students shortly. So
I'm sorry I can't join you. Sounds like a great plan.
We'll see.
Thank you. What time do we finish? Now?
Yeah, now, but if
Hey, is there maybe one more question? Someone else? Yeah, in the back, sir.
I walked in late, maybe I missed this, but how did you reach the decision to videotape this?
I record all my lectures. Camera's right there.
Okay, so
yeah.
I didn't know if you were, because you said you hadn't experienced this kind of
Yeah, the camera's right there. No, I record all my lectures on YouTube for class. When my quasi-students takes my content lectures sitting right there. So all my lectures online.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. And
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Andy.
I didn't know about this paper assignment.
What's that?
I didn't know about this paper
Oh,
assignment.
Columbia Law